Hey everybody, welcome to Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. This is episode number 314 of our YouTube channel and podcast, and I cannot be more excited to continue sharing with you guys personal finance topics that I think could be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. Today, we are going to be talking about debt. And you know I talk about debt quite a bit, right? But today we are going to be talking about the amount of debt that we have outstanding. Right? And not just as a whole, but if you break down the amount of debt that Americans have by our age and by our generation, how much debt do we actually have and what is that debt on? Because I want us to be aware. I want us to be aware of our pitfalls. I want us to be aware of the hole that we need to dig out of because you know my thoughts on consumer debt and being out of debt and the importance of doing so. And if we can better understand where we're at, then I think we can better understand how to get out of it. And I hope to help you through that in today's episode and moving forward in my episodes as we talk about debt and as we talk about the importance of not straining your cash flow in this way. So stick around for a discussion of all that and more in today's episode. Before we get started though, if you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments down below and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan, and that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. And then if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just DM me on any of the major social media sites and tell me that you are interested in financial coaching sessions, and you and I can begin working together, pushing towards your long-term financial goals and ultimately pushing you on towards long-term financial freedom, which is what I hope for every single individual watching or listening to this show on a day-to-day basis. Now, I don't have to lead with the spiel of exactly how I feel about debt. You know, right? If you've listened to this show at all, you know how I feel about debt. You know that I think debt's a strain on your cash flow. You know that I think that we should get out of all debt as quickly as possible. You know that I understand that debt is used as a tool by some people, but it's rarely used responsibly as a tool. So I think we shouldn't play with the law of averages. We should go about getting out of debt and getting ourselves ahead on our net worth, ahead on our balance sheets, and not falling behind. Obviously, I understand what some people are using debt for. I do. I understand that some people finance rental homes with debt, and a lot of people make money doing that. Some people finance other investments with debt, right? I get it, right? And some people finance businesses with debt. I get why they do it, and I get the theory, right? But typically that theory doesn't work out. Typically that theory can just lead us further and further into this place that we don't want to be, right? We don't want to be left with no money. We don't want to be left in a position where we're broke, right? And debt can leave you in a position where you're broke, right? You can't file bankruptcy if there's no debt, right? You're not going to foreclose on your home if there's no debt, okay? And I think we forget about some of the risks sometimes, and that leads us into, hey, this debt's cheap, or this debt is normal, or this debt's good debt, or this debt's, at least acceptable by your peers. And we go into it. So I want to talk about the amount of debt that we have. This is a new article that's out that is talking about, hey, this is how much debt we have as of 2020, right? This is the amount of debt that we have by generation. And I think this is all very, very interesting. So from student and auto loans to credit card debt, the average American owes money in one way or another. Okay, in 2020, outstanding consumer debt in the U.S. reached $14.88 trillion, according to data from an Experian consumer debt study, which analyzed credit report information for a statistically relevant sampling from its database, right? And if you know anything about Experian has a huge database of information, so I would trust this study as far as having a large sample and a large enough sample to be relevant. Now, that's more than the $14.88 trillion. That's more than a $3 trillion increase from the 2010s total of $11.32 trillion. So in 2010, the total amount of debt that we had outstanding as households was $11.32 trillion, and it's all the way up to $14.88. And this represents an average individual debt, this $14.88 trillion, of $92,727 a person, right? However, the debt burden isn't spread evenly across generations or individuals, and that's what we're here to talk about, right? So let's look at the average amount of debt that each generation holds. And so this includes credit card debt, student loans, personal debt, and auto loans. Mortgage debt is excluded from these totals, okay? So let's just jump right in with the youngest of these generations that have come to age, and that is Gen Z. Right, so I don't think anybody would be surprised that Gen Z has the lowest in the amount of debt of the four generations that we're going to look at. We're going to look at Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and the Baby Boomers. No surprise that they would have the least debt because they're the youngest, and a lot of them haven't gotten into a position to actually take debt out yet. Okay, so Gen Zers who range from ages 18 to 23 hold an average of $16,043 in debt. An eighth of that is comprised as credit card debt, okay? That means that each person is carrying an average of $1,963 in just credit card debt. Now, just right off the bat, $2,000 in credit card debt at age 23 or below, that's not a good sign. That means we're living above our means. We're living above what we can actually afford. And in doing so, we're accruing interest that is extremely costly, right? Credit card interest is some of the most costly interest that you're going to run across. And so holding credit card balances, not a good idea, Gen Z. Okay. Now, for young people, this is the most dangerous kind of debt. Not only do you want to pay your credit cards off as quickly as possible, you want to avoid credit card debt moving forward. Right? I tell you guys all the time, I use credit cards. I do. Okay. I use credit cards. I swipe it on just about everything. I use my credit card like it's my debit card. But what do we know about debit cards? There's a fixed amount of money behind there, or there's just an amount of money behind there, behind that debit card that's saying how much money you can actually spend that you actually have. Okay, credit cards, they may have a limit, but that limit may not be an amount of money that's reasonable for you to spend that you actually have in your bank account to pay it off, right? So I treat my credit card like a debit card, okay? I use it for everything, but then I pay it off every single month. I can't remember the last time I used my debit card, okay? But I pay it off every single month, pay my credit cards off every single month, get the benefits of doing so, right? But if you're in a position where you're holding credit card debt, meaning you're accruing interest on your debt, that is a problem. And that's something that I don't do, and that's something I don't condone. And I've told you that credit cards are dangerous. And if you get into the cycle of holding a balance on your credit cards, you're just going to keep losing. So sometimes the best thing to do is to avoid credit cards altogether if you have this habit of doing this. Now, credit card debt tends to be the highest interest rate debt that people carry. And again, that just makes it all the more dangerous. It's also important for young people that get their first credit cards to understand that credit card companies want their customers to carry a balance in order to charge them interest rates as high as 25%. This is true, right? How do credit card companies make money? They make money on you holding a balance. Okay, they're not making money when I'm paying off my credit card every month. If anything, you kind of beat the system, at least with the credit card company, by, hey, I'm spending money, yes, and yes, they get those transaction fees. So that's great for them. That is beneficial for them that they make transaction fees, but those don't come out of my pocket, right? Those come out of the pocket of the whoever I am spending money with. Now, some may argue that any type of tax like that is paid for by us. Perfectly fine, but we don't see that, right? We don't see that transaction fee, and that transaction fee is just going to be there, right? It's baked into the price, and whether you pay, in cash or not, that particular price that you're going to pay at the grocery store or whatever is still going to be that price. So it's already baked in. Might as well just use the credit card, okay? But we know that credit card companies, they want you to hold that balance. They want you to get comfortable in doing so because they will make more money. They will make a majority of their money by customers paying interest and just having to make these types of payments over time. Okay. Now, credit card companies are very good at making it easy to make a minimum payment, right? These are not what we call amortized loans. These are loans that do not have some fixed repayment schedule. Okay, you could pay a minimum payment on a credit card for a long time before that credit card actually gets paid off. Right? It's a very slippery slope, and before you know it, it's a never-ending battle of paying it down. Now, that's just kind of the focus with the Gen Zs is the credit cards because it's an eighth of their debt, which is significant. And then ultimately, they're not really in a place to buy a whole lot of other things. Obviously, I would caution against going into debt on a depreciating asset like a car. not taking out debt to go to school, if at all possible, right? And we can make it at all possible. We just choose not to in many cases, and I have episodes on that too. So avoiding debt is paramount when you're in this Gen Z age, because if you get used to it now, if you get used to it at 18 to 23 or 18 to 24 years old, then you're going to live a life used to being in debt, right? And it's going to be normalized, and you're just constantly going to have this strain on your cash flow over a long period of time, okay? So Gen Z's average debt, $16,043. Not huge, right? But we didn't necessarily expect it to be. I just hope it doesn't get substantially larger. Now, undoubtedly, I'm sure it will. But I hope it doesn't get as large as some of the debts that are being held right now by the millennials and the Gen Xers, which we are going to get to next. Now, millennials, the oldest of whom turned 40 this year, have significantly higher average debt than younger counterparts. Millennials owe $87,448 on average, with an average student loan balance just under $39,000. In addition, millennials also hold an average mortgage balance of $237,349. Now, if you'll remember, mortgage balances aren't held in this particular data set, right? But they're just saying on top of the $87,448, you're also seeing a mortgage balance of another $237,000, right? So you put all that together, we're talking $330,000 of debt being held by millennials, which is huge, right? With many members of this generation becoming both parents and homeowners for the first time, millennials have the smallest amount of leeway when it comes to financial planning and debt. You have to be careful when you buy that first home that you'll be able to pay off your mortgage even with childcare expenses, right? If you buy a home when you're 30 or 32 and you plan to have your first kid at 34, make sure you factor all that in. And obviously, a lot of people do things like that a lot earlier. Right? I'm 26 years old, just had my first child, right? So I'm one of the younger millennials, but this is something that we have to keep in mind. But there's really two big things that were keyed in on here, and I think it's very relevant. Student loans are just tearing millennials apart, right? Student loans are something that millennials have just allowed to ravage them, and I fear that Gen Z is in for the same fate. So that's a very big part of the debt that we hold. Not I hold, but I have had student loans in the past, and they're paid off now. And I see how they can be just a hindrance to a lot of millennials that want to get their finances right, but they just have this big weight around their neck with these student loans. And so I think that's a big deal. And then obviously this is a point in life where a lot of things are changing, and a lot of those things are costly, right? Having children is costly. Trust me, having children is costly. So having the cash to do that is very important. Buying a house is costly, right? And if you're going to buy a house, you need to make sure that you can put your down payment down and make your payment, and hopefully make your payment on a 15-year mortgage, and have plenty of leeway still to do things like invest, and if you want to have children, things like that, right? This is just a tough time. There is very little financial leeway. You have to budget effectively here. You have to understand that getting out of debt is important, right? At this point, a lot of people are already in debt, and then the question becomes, are you going to get out of it and build a strong financial life and a strong financial foundation for yourself, or are you going to wallow in it? And a lot of millennials do wallow in it, right? But there are also a lot of millennials out there like myself who want to get out, and then want to move forward in a positive manner. Now, just keep your mortgage debt under wraps. I'm not mad at mortgage debt. I just want you to know that over time you want to get that thing paid off. But don't mess with credit cards. Like I said, with Gen Z, auto loans, I'm sure, are a pretty substantial part of the debt that millennials hold. But student loans, man, student loans are just an absolute killer for millennials. If the oldest millennials are turning 40 this year, I'm sure there's plenty 40-year-old millennials with student loans. And that's sad, right? It's sad to know that this many individuals have student loans, and an average of $39,000. That's a lot of debt, right? Now, obviously, there are greater amounts out there. Don't get me wrong. If you're a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, you probably pull up that average quite a bit. But just for the average person to have $39,000 in student loan debt, that can keep you from doing what you want to do in your financial life, and it can be a hindrance to moving forward. So, nonetheless, that's millennials, $87,448 in debt on average, okay? So we're ratcheting things up here. But millennials are not the highest as far as average debt when it comes to the generations. Okay, we get then to Gen X, right? This is my parents' generation, right? Gen X, with ages ranging from 41 to 56, Gen Xers have a wide range of life experiences, along with the highest average debt of any generation. Many members of Gen X are sending their kids to college for the first time while still carrying an average student loan balance of just over $45,000. So of the millennials, right, average student loan debt of $39,000, but of their parents, right, of the Gen Xers or of those just older than them, right, not, all Gen Xers are old enough to be all millennials' parents, right? But of that next generation, the average student loan balance for them is $45,000, right? So people are getting older and the interest is just accruing, and they have higher amounts of student loan debt, which is it's a big issue. All right, we want our student loan balances to go down and go down quickly, and we don't want it to be around our neck all the way to retirement, right? Because think about this. This is age 41 to 56. 56 is scary close to being retirement age, and so I don't want us to have student loans when we get towards retirement, but we'll talk more about this here in just a moment. But Gen Xers, they should remember to focus on their own debt burdens before their children. A lot of Gen Xers are trying to look out for their kids, trying to do what's best for their kids as their kids come of age, but they are also saddled with a lot of debt, right? You have to avoid taking on more debt to finance your children's education. Your kids can get financial aid for their education. I don't think they should, because financial aid means debt in most cases, right? Now, you can't get your financial aid for retirement, though. Okay, that's the problem with Gen X. Okay, Gen X, it's go time. If you don't have substantial retirement savings by then, you need to get on the ball, right? And getting on that ball means that you need to minimize your debt burden. It means that you need to free up cash flow in order to invest aggressively. And we can't do that with $45,000 in student loans, and we can't do that if we're constantly focused on our kids, right? Our kids ultimately have to live our own lives, right? The kids have to live their own lives, and you can't just finance everything that they do, especially when you're out there already financing everything that you do, okay? Now, Gen X, this doesn't give a whole breakdown of what they have debt-wise, but obviously $45,000 in student loans would be a substantial chunk, but that leaves like another $95,000 in debt that they have. My guess, auto loans, obviously some people are taking out debt for their kids' college, which is a huge no-no. Don't be taking out Parent Plus loans and all things like that. That just is not a good idea. I would also guess that credit card debt may be a substantial part of this, right? Gen Xers, I think, were some of the first ones to really get marketed debt to them, right? Those that are 41 to 56, because let's see, if you're 56 years old in 2021, what does that make your date of birth? So that puts you back to what? That puts you back to 1965, right? So that means, you were coming of age in the 80s, right? Or, the mid 80s there. And so if you're coming to age in the mid-'80s, I mean, credit card companies were really ramping up their, advertisements towards you, being able to finance cars and, these financing schedules that we see today, that was becoming more normalized. Student loans were becoming more normalized. So I think that this generation having the most debt is not just because they're older, but it's because they were marketed debt very, very heavily. I would be very interested to know, and obviously you can't know this now, right? But I would be interested to follow Gen Z, because Gen Z, I think, is learning a lot from millennials and Gen X. And I think they're finding out that a lot of the debt that's being taken out by those generations is not as valuable as they thought it was going to be. Like student loans, I think Gen Z, we're going to see a big drop off in the amount of student loans they took out. I think we're going to see a big drop off in the amount of auto debt, because I don't think Gen Z is driving as much as the millennials and the Gen Xers were or are. I think Gen Z is learning a lesson, and maybe it's a very good lesson to learn, right? But nonetheless, millennials and Gen Xers, they still have to clean up their own mess. They can't just sit around and wallow in it and cry about it, right? We have to get out there and take care of our own business. We can't focus on our children too much. We have to just focus on getting ourselves cleaned up. And then once your own financial life is cleaned up, by all means, help your children. By all means, do things that will help them move forward financially. But digging a deeper hole for yourself, just to not dig a deeper hole for your child, you still dug a hole, right? And that hole's just as deep as it's going to be. no matter if you dig it for yourself or you let your child dig it for themselves, there's still a hole, right? And somebody's going to have to pay for it. I know many would say, well, hey, I'd rather pay for it than them. No, you wouldn't, right? You want to help your kid out, but you don't want to get that type of burden around your neck, especially with retirement looming right around the corner, okay? So that's Gen Xers. The highest amount of average debt, $140,643 per person. Then what about the baby boomers? Okay, with their oldest members now 75 years old, baby boomers have considerably less debt than the generation below them at an average of $97,290 each. That includes a personal loan balance, and this, I don't get this, a personal loan balance of $19,700 on average, and an average of $6,000 in credit card debt approximately, right? So that is almost $26,000 of personal loans and credit card debt. What are we doing, boomers? I'm trying to figure that out. I don't know what you guys are out spending money on in that way, but that's just consumerism, right? That's just consuming things because you want it. And say what you want, right? There are many boomers that are across many spectrums, but boomers, why are they called baby boomers? They're called baby boomers because their dads went off to war, right, and came home and had babies, right, with their mom, right? And so they're around, and their parents wanted to give them the best and wanted to, live in this new America that, is liberated and everything's, great and everything's awesome and, money is abounding. I think boomers got a little spoiled, and I think these numbers kind of show that boomers got a little spoiled and continue to try to spoil themselves with taking out debt in order to finance whatever they can get their hands on. Now, again, that's just conjecture, but why else would you have $26,000 on average per person in credit cards and personal loans? That's a problem, especially in retirement. That is a big problem. Boomers also owe an average of $178,688 on their mortgages, right? But although retirement is around the corner, they should continue focusing on saving, right? Especially at this point, right? If you don't have your retirement nest egg set up, it is vital that you do, right? I want you 100%. I want you to have your mortgage paid off before you are retired, right? But if you're 70 years old and you're, questioning whether you have enough to retire on and you still have this big mortgage, I would suggest that, it's probably more valuable for you to continue saving. In some cases, though, just based on the cost benefit there, it may be better that you get your mortgage paid off because decreasing expenses it's easier sometimes than actually creating income in retirement, right? You need a lot of money in order to sustain a perpetual stream of income, but you need less to just pay off a debt that would cause you to have payments over some fixed period of time. Now, the incentive to get that mortgage paid off before retirement is not necessarily the same as it used to be when interest rates were much higher, especially compared to what your retirement nest egg might be earning. Your retirement nest egg could earn a lot more than those interest rates. But again, we're not necessarily playing those games. We're playing the game of we need cash flow to retire, and we are losing cash flow to this particular payment that we're having to make, this mortgage payment that we're making in retirement, right? And also in retirement, you have to think, yes, you could make good returns on your nest egg, but those returns wane as you de-risk and as you get closer to retirement and you change up your asset allocation a bit. So I think the boomers, they've got a little consumerism about them, right? I think they, they should have paid off their mortgages by now, but it seems that many of them haven't. It's unfortunate that many of them have this much debt, but it's still important that they get it paid off. It's still important that they don't have it hanging around their neck because, having debt in retirement just doesn't sound like any fun at all, right? So how do we tackle this, right? Let me just give you some practical steps before we get out of here today, right? How do you tackle debt? If you haven't watched this show, if you haven't listened to my thoughts on this before, then tune in now, right? But if you have, you probably know what I'm going to say. And it's very, very simple, right? The way that we pay off debt and the way that we can do so most efficiently doesn't have anything to do with interest rate, right? It has to do with amount. And again, we're talking X mortgage, no, not mortgage debt, all other consumer debt, student loans, credit cards, auto loans, all those things, right? You take each individual debt and you write it down on a piece of paper, okay? Then you organize them from the smallest amount of debt to the largest amount of debt. Okay. And you may say, well, why would I do that? Well, because I want you to pay them off from smallest amount to largest amount. And the reason that you would do that is so you can build momentum in paying your debts off. Right? If you can't build any momentum, if you can't get the debt snowball rolling downhill, then you're going to have a problem staying motivated. Right? We want to stay motivated in the debt payoff process. Okay, so you'll start with the smallest debt. And when I talk about like student loans, every single individual student loan should be written there. That way you can get some wins, because I know you may have $39,000 in student loan debt, but that's probably over 12 different loans of differing amounts, right? So put each individual loan, right, each individual debt, and you'll pay the minimum payment on every single one of your debts other than the smallest one. Throw all extra money that you can, all excess money that you have available to you at that smallest debt until that smallest debt is eventually paid off. Then once it's paid off, throw everything that you were throwing at that debt plus the minimum payment you were making on that second debt, and then just continue all the way down the line until all your debts are paid off, right? With most people, this debt snowball takes 2 or 3 years to get all of your debt paid off, right? Based on those averages we were just looking at. Now, the less debt you have, the shorter period of time it's going to take. The more debt you have, the greater amount of time that it could take, right? But it is paramount. It is paramount that we free up our cash flow, and this is going to let us do it in an efficient way. It's going to let us do it in a way that we feel like we've accomplished something and that we can continue on paying off debts until everything is completely done. I know that there is this culture out here of, if I can take out cheap debt, I should. And mathematically, they're right. Okay, and mathematically, it's probably worked out for a lot of people. And mathematically, you could make an argument. The problem is that math doesn't change behavior, right? And math doesn't make you better with your finances. Okay, yes, if you took out a 2.5% mortgage, and instead of ever getting that mortgage paid off, you just kept refinancing or kept doing whatever cash out refis, and then just investing the difference between the rates that you make on your money and the rates that you're having to pay on your particular mortgage, and that worked, then fantastic, right? But what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if returns fall short, right? What happens then? What happens when you're trying to do this, taking out debt in order to invest in things, and it's not working out for you, right? The returns aren't working out for you, yet you still have to make those debt payments, right? We do not need to leverage our investments, okay? Because that's basically what you're doing there. And anytime you leverage something, right? The reason that why do we take out debt? We take out debt so that something tomorrow becomes something today, right? We fast forward our life. We fast forward our consumerism, right? We fast forward what we can purchase by taking out debt, right? Well, naturally, what that does is that takes on more risk, right? Yes, debt is going to accelerate returns you can make in your life, but it's also going to accelerate losses. And I think that I'm good on not getting my losses accelerated, okay? And I think that we should all, err to the side of not getting our losses accelerated, okay? Do what you want. I'm not going to force you into anything. I'm just telling you want the most efficient path to building wealth over a long period of time. Getting out of debt is paramount, regardless of the interest rate, regardless of what they're offering you on an auto loan, regardless of what they're offering you on a mortgage, right? Being completely out of debt and having all of your cash flow freed up in order to spend it on the things you want to spend it on, invest and save in aggressive ways, and then give extremely generously. That is what personal finance is about. That is what we should be doing with our money, not just constantly giving it back to banks and financing companies and all of the like as we go through our financial life, right? I want each generation to attack these debts. I'm hopeful for these younger generations, Gen Z specifically, that they don't get into as much debt as the millennials did as a group, or as the Gen Xers, or even the boomers. But time will only tell, and it will take a big culture shift in the United States to get away from this consumerist mindset and this mindset of, hey, I can just take out debt for that, no problem. So hopefully this episode is eye-opening to the amount of debt that we're all really holding, and it can really give you a better perspective as to what your neighbor may have, what you may have, how you should feel about that particular type of debt, how you should work to get those debts paid off, and ultimately how each generation is a little bit different in the way they check out debt. But ultimately, debt is debt, and this is money that needs to be repaid and needs to be done so expeditiously so we can all move forward with our net worths growing and not falling further and further behind over time. So thanks for watching this video. If you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan, and that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. And if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just DM me on any of the major social media sites and tell me that you are interested in financial coaching sessions, and you and I can begin working together, pushing towards your long-term financial goals and ultimately pushing you on towards long-term financial freedom, which is what I hope for every single individual watching or listening to the show on a day-to-day basis. So tune in tomorrow as I continue talking about personal finance topics that I think could be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. God bless.